Got a few questions to open up today. Can you tell me how many meters are in a kilometer, how many centimeters in a meter, how many millimeters in a centimeter, and hence how many millimeters are in a kilometer? Pause the video, try this out. So these are important things to know so that you can convert between the two or different units. There are 1,000 meters in a kilometer. It's like 2.5 times around an athletics track, because an athletics track is 400 meters. There are 100 centimeters in a meter, so sometimes you say your height in centimeters, you might say it in meters, so be careful. There are 10 millimeters in a centimeter, so if you look at your ruler, you can see a centimeter split up into 10 little things, that's each a millimeter. And finally, if we want to go from how many millimeters in a kilometer, well, we have to basically times these together. So it's going to be 1,000 times 1,000. It's going to be 1,000,000. There are 1,000,000 millimeters in a kilometer. Less worried about remembering that one because you can use the other three to figure it out. So, given that, can you convert these units? Can you convert 7 centimeters into these units here? Well, we need to think about how we go between them, but centimeters into millimeters is going to mean I'm going from a bigger unit to a smaller unit, so I'm going to end up with more of them. I'm going to times 3 by 10. This is the key thing. What do we do with this 10 here? Times 3 by 10, we get 70 millimeters. Now we're going to a bigger unit. There's going to be less of it, so I'm going to actually divide 3 by 100. It's going to be 0.07 meters. And then I need to take that and divide that by 1,000. So 0.00007 kilometers. One way of remembering it is to, you can use this and you can sort of create a little kind of way of going between them. So we're using the information above. If I'm going from I know there's 1 kilometer is 1,000 meters, so going this way I would times by 1,000 kilometers to meters, I would times by 1,000. And here I would times by 100. And here I would times by 10. And going the other way, I would then divide. So if you're not happy at just using these ones here, you can think about it. Just take your time and use this kind of idea. A few more. Let's just check your understanding. 3.1 meters into the following. Go. So I'm dividing by 1,000 here. It's going to be 0.0031 kilometers. Times by 100, it's going to be 310 centimeters. And times that by 10, 3,100 millimeters. Hopefully you're in a good place. This is a topic from a while ago. It's not actually the one we're looking at today, but if you understand this, you're in a good place for what we are going to look at. All right, how about these ones? Convert 70 centimeters squared into millimeters squared, meters squared, kilometers squared. Give this a go. Okay, well actually the answer to A, if you went for 700, then you are incorrect. It is actually 7,000 millimeters squared. For meter squared, it's actually well actually I've got the standard form here. It's 0.007 meters squared. And kilometers squared is 7, it's such a small number that it's 7 times 10 to the minus 9 kilometers squared. Now if you got those correct, then you have probably understood what we are going to cover today, which is converting area units. If you got them wrong, then watch on and I'm going to explain it. If you got them right, then get on and do some practice if you want to revise this unit, but you're in a good place. We've also got to look at volume units though. But let's say this is you right now. Okay, here goes. We are going to look at converting area and volume measurements or units. And also capacity is going to come in there, which I'll talk more about. So how did I do this? I've not explained it yet. Well, what we don't do actually is we don't times by 10 to go from centimeters squared to millimeters squared. You might be able to see that we times by 100. But why? Well, if I take a square that's 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter and find the area, I just do 1 times 1. It's 1 centimeters squared, because I also have to think about the fact that I'm finding an area. It's centimeters times centimeters, I suppose, which gives you centimeters squared. That's a definition of centimeters squared, a 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter square. Now, if I was to write this same square out, but using millimeters, I'd get 10 millimeters here, so I've times by 10. But in my second dimension that I also have to times that by 10. So that's why it's 100 millimeters squared, not 10. And what I've actually done is I'm not going to say that I'm timesing by 100. I'm actually timesing by 10 in the first dimension, and in the second dimension, I'm timesing through by 10 squared. What about for this one here? If it's 1 meter by 1 meter, by definition, it's 1 meter squared. Now, there are 100 centimeters in a meter, but there are 100 centimeters in a meter in this dimension as well. And what I end up with is 10,000 centimeters squared. And when I did it here, because I was going from centimeter squared to meter squared, I actually divided by 10,000. Or actually, I divided by 100 squared, because that's just a bit quicker to put into my calculator. Because I know that I'm timesing by 100 to go from meters to centimeters, but I'm doing it in both dimensions. I just put a little squared there. Hopefully you're happy with this. It's different than when we're dealing with lengths. And here we go then. What about volume? So if you're feeling confident, pause the video, try and figure out how I can go from centimeters cubed to millimeters cubed. Well, I've written some of it down already. This is going to be 1 centimeters cubed. I have to times each of these by 10 to get it in terms of millimeters. I get 100 millimeters cubed, and actually I'm going to be timesing, therefore, to go from centimeters cubed to millimeters cubed. This is what I'm saying, to go from the unit, I'm going to be timesing by 10 cubed. So for areas, I'm going to be timesing by 10 squared, because it's 2 dimensions. For volumes, going from centimeters to millimeters, times by 10 cubed, because there are 3 dimensions. And here, it's going to be very similar. I'm going to times by 100 cubed to go from 1 meter cubed to however many centimeter cubed I want. And that is actually 1,000,000. So seems to be a lot of things to remember, but it's not quite that bad. Let's look at it. So it's the same kind of setup as before. Let's just go back to the top. We were dividing by 10 at the top, and so on. Divide by 10, divide by 100, divide by 1,000. It's very similar setup. So as long as you can remember this from before, you're in a good place. But this time, because it's area, you have to remember to square them. Square them, square them, because you're doing it in 2 dimensions. And the same would go this way instead of dividing, you're timesing. I just realized I accidentally, sorry, I wrote cubed for 2 of them. I'm not cubing them, I'm squaring them. So I'm getting ahead of myself because that is what you do down here. It's almost exactly the same. So divide by 10, divide by 100, divide by 1,000. But this time I'm cubing. Now you don't need to learn these. You basically just need to learn this stuff up here. And then remember, if it's area, you do squared, like you just stick a squared on here, and a squared on here, and a squared on here, and so on for the other ones. And then when you're doing your conversion, this will naturally come out. But I'm just going to put this down for completeness. Okay, and some of these are here already. I just want to talk about a couple more. So 10,000 meters squared. is considered a hectare. You might have seen this before. And just bringing in capacity, this is also important to learn, that actually 1 litre is 1,000 centimetres squared. You're expected to know that. And therefore, because there are 1,000 millilitres in a litre, there are 1,000 centimetres cubed. There are 1,000 centimetres cubed in a litre. It's just the same thing. And then 1 metre cubed is 1,000 litres, because 1 metre cubed is actually it's going to be 1,000,000 centimetres cubed. So all kind of links together. Right, therefore, I want you to try these ones here. Okay, I'll go through them in a second, but can you convert? If you're not so sure, you can use these as examples, because I've got a couple more questions below. Alright, to go from 72,000 centimetres squared to metres squared, let's just think about this. We are going to a bigger unit, so it's going to get smaller. We're going to divide by 100, but we're going to divide by 100 squared, which is 10,000. So we get 7.2 metres squared. Centimetre cubed to millimetre cubed, we're going to a smaller unit, so it's going to get a bigger number. We're going to times by 10 to go from centimetres to millimetres, but we're going to times by 10 cubed because it's volume, which is 1,000. So we get 300 millimetre cubed. And then centimetre cubed to litres, well, we've got this little fact in our head. We're going to divide through by 1,000 basically, and that's going to give us 4.5 litres. If you want a little bit more practice, here goes. Pause the video, try this. Otherwise, you can zoom on a bit. I've got one more example, and then it's about you doing some practice, just making sure you're really happy with these ideas. You'll be applying this knowledge to lots of different kind of questions using area. So, millimetres squared to centimetres squared. Right, I'm going to be dividing by 10, but I'm going to be dividing by 10 squared. So I get 0.021 centimetres squared. Metre squared to kilometre squared, I'm going to a bigger unit, so it's going to get smaller. So I'm going to divide by 1,000. I'm actually going to divide by 1,000 squared, which is 1,000,000. So this is actually 1 kilometre squared. 50 litres into metres cubed. Oof, okay. Well, a few ways of doing it. Okay, I'm going to remember that it is 50. So 1 litre is 1,000 centimetres squared. That's what I'm going to remember. So it's going to be 50 times 1,000 centimetres, cubed. And then I need to go from centimetres to metres. I need to divide by 100. So centimetres cubed to metres cubed, I'm going to divide by 100 cubed. I'm going to do this on a calculator. 50 times 1,000 divided by 100 cubed, actually 0.05 meters cubed. And then finally this one. So centimeters to millimeters, I times by 10. So I'm going to times by 10 cubed, and I get 620 millimeters cubed. One more. Calculate the area of this triangle given your answer is a millimeter squared. Is there more than one way you could have worked it out? Well, I'm going to kind of answer the last question first, to be honest, because I could either, so 7 centimeters is actually 70 millimeters, and 100 millimeters is going to be 10 centimeters. So the quickest way is probably going to be to do a half base times height, but do it in millimeters. So it's going to be a half times 70 times 100. I can work that out. It's going to be this is going to be 7,000. Half that, 3,500 millimeters. Or we could have done a half times 7. Sorry, that should be millimeters squared. A half times 7 times 10, which is 35 centimeters squared. And then I need to divide by 10 squared. I'm sorry, not divide by 10 squared. I've got it in centimeters squared. So I need to times by 10 squared to get it into millimeters squared. And I'll again get exactly the same answer. So you can decide how you go about it. In this case, I do think this is quicker. But another important point is to say, like, be careful reading questions. You won't always, know. You won't always have had a lesson on it. So you've got to recognize that they are different units. Hope you're happy with this. Do some more practice. This has been converting area and volume units, as well as a little bit on capacity. Well done.